Your Excellency, the Ambassador of Portugal, Professor Motskin, Professor Aslanov, dear guests, colleagues. It's for me a great pleasure to chair the first session of this international workshop. I'm very glad to see in the audience many good friends from different parts of the world. And it's for me particularly a pleasure to chair a session where two good friends and prominent scholars will deliver their lectures. I will omit further preliminary remarks to the preliminary remarks of the session, and I will introduce Professor Claude Stuczynski from the Department of General History at the Bar-Ilan University. He doesn't need any introduction here. He is well known for his excellent studies. He's a prominent historian of the Converso phenomenon, has published fascinating studies on the Portuguese conversos, and is the main organizer of his workshop. I will only mention a few of his more known publications. The Hebrew comprehensive edition of Samuel Schwartz's classic on the Portuguese New Christians in the 20th century, Anotzrim HaChadashim, Portugal במאה ה-20, and a French publication about the Judaizers of Braganza and the Inquisition of Coimbra that will be published, I understand, in a few weeks by months by Edition Chandaigne. Two of his forthcoming books are In Defense of the Nation, Portuguese Converso Apologetics in the 17th Century, and a Hebrew book on Bartolomé de las Casas and his defense of the Amerindians. He's now working on a comprehensive study on the theological political dimension of the Converso phenomenon, what he calls the Marrano-Paulinian moment, and he is board member of the Center for the Study of Conversions within Abrahamic Religions at Ben-Gurion University, Beersheba. And I must tell you that yesterday night I was captivated by one of the last publications by our friend Claude Stuczynski that appeared in a book published by Miriam Silveira on a conference in Ferrara, Not Hybridity, but Counterculture. I think a splendid study that will be, I'm sure, discussed in historiography. Please.
Thank you very much. Perhaps I need to stand because I have a PowerPoint. No problem. His Excellency, I don't need yet. After I will make you a sign. His Excellency, the Ambassador of Portugal, Miguel de Almeida Souza, and the Cultural Attaché, Laura Oliva, Her Excellency, the Ambassador of El Salvador, Susana Gun de Hassenson, the Director of the Van Leer Institute, Professor Gabriel Motskin, and the Head of the Mediterranean Unit, Professor Cyril Arslanov, and the co-editor and already a friend of the Journal of Levantine Studies, Dr. Edo Litmanovich, the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities at Bar-Ilan University, Professor Shifra Baruchson, and the chair of my Department of General History, Dr. Hilda Nesimi, members of the Israel Science Foundation and of the Institut Camões, my deep gratitude for your generous support. Muito obrigado. Dear colleagues and friends coming from abroad and from along the country, distinguished guests and public, ladies and gentlemen, welcome and good morning. Bon dia. To this day, discussions of underground and concealed identities often invoke the case of the Iberian conversos, Marranos, or New Christians. This is so much so that the term Marranism has become a paradigm of secret, variegated, divided, or restrained forms of Judaism. Strangely enough, these views are celebrated today by those who nostalgically endorse essentialist perceptions of Jewishness, seeing conversos and crypto-Jews almost everywhere, as well by those who adopt conversos' divided souls as an antidote to contemporary parochial chauvinism in Israel or elsewhere. A depiction that did much to strengthen both opposing views was Samuel Schwartz, Os Cristãos Novos em Portugal no século XX, 1925. In this book, Schwartz revealed the existence of converso descendants living in 20th century Portugal who have maintained crypto-Jewish beliefs, prayers, and practices. His findings aroused much excitement as official Judaism was banned in the kingdom since the forced mass conversion of 1497. Between the establishment of the Portuguese Inquisition in 1536 and the enlightened absolutist reforms of the Marquis of Pombal in the second half of the 18th century, Judaizing was branded as a dangerous, punishable heresy. Through this long period of time, at least, and afterwards, claimed Schwartz, secrecy played a central role in the preservation of the forbidden law of Moses. Although he attributes the persistence of Portuguese crypto-Judaism compared to the more ephemeral Spanish case, to the abrupt character of the mass conversion in Portugal and the late establishment of the Holy Office, Schwartz paid much more attention to the secret inner character of the Marrano lore than to the external factors that supported its survival. Schwartz's book was representative of a broader historiographical shift toward a growing concern for conversos' inner identities. The author was assisted then by the director of the archives of the Inquisition at Torre do Tombo in Lisbon, Antonio Baião, who wrote a 3-volume work on cases of people convicted by the Portuguese Inquisitions. His Episódios Dramáticos da Inquisição Portuguesa was a sort of Benjaminian historiographical project in the sense that Baião aimed to restitute to the victims of the Holy Office their stolen voices by reading a contrario the narratives written by their culprits. Subsequent contributions made by Cecil Roth reinforced the conviction that an authentic history of the Marranos could be written by analyzing, among others, thousands of inquisitorial trials. That said, Israel Salvatore Rebas' path-breaking work from the 1950s to the early 70s on Marranism as potential Judaism, on the intricate relationship between Iberian New Christian and Sephardic ex-converso Jews, and on the complex converso experience as a substratum of converso and ex-converso Jewish skepticism and heterodoxies, brought to a peak the interest in studying conversos' inner identities. Later on, with the growing influence of cultural and post-colonial studies in the 1980s and the 1990s, a further de-essentialization of conversos' identities was made, especially in Anglo-Saxon and French scholarship. Converso identity came to be seen as hybrid, liquid, and fuzzy, rather than as quintessentially crypto-Jewish in a highly depoliticized ways, as if they were mere byproducts of subjective negotiations and heuristic self-fashioning. In its initial stage, however, research on the Portuguese Converso phenomenon centered on its overt public dimensions. Alessandro Herculano's pioneering history of the establishment of the Portuguese Inquisition in the middle of the 19th century narrated the 30-year struggle between King John III and the new Christian to establish or block the Holy Office in Portugal, pointing to the existence of an influential Converso leadership and a sophisticated pro-Converso lobby. Joaquim Mendes dos Remedios collection of articles published in the second volume of his Judeus en Portugal showed that during the time of the Astur dynastical union, Converso leaders had to negotiate as a collective the relief of their debased condition vis-à-vis the Inquisition and restrictive laws by obtaining from popes and kings general pardons in exchange for substantial sums of money. These were often collected as compulsive taxes, fintas, within the members of the new Christian Nação. Moreover, João Lúcio de Azevedo panoramic and influential História dos Cristãos Novos Portugueses argued, with quasi-racial overtones, however, that Converso political activities were part of a longue-durée antagonism between the New Christian minority and the Old Christian majority. After a historiographical hiatus, Antonio José Saraiva readapted during the early 70s, past political concerns as approach in his Inquisição e Cristãos Novos, but this time imbued with Marxist approaches. He claimed that the persecutions of the Holy Office against the New Christians and the exclusivist anti-Converso laws of purity of blood were superstructural means to prevent the social ascension of the Converso men of the nation, who were perceived as a bourgeois class of men of commerce who threatened the established feudal order. With different emphasis, all these political perspectives showed that the Conversos were often overtly treated as a de facto separated group, whether as an ethnic nation, as a political state, as an economic class, and of course, as a group carrying an endemic Judaic heresy. Therefore, even the sincere Catholics among them were part of the Converso story against their will, because they had to face such collective assumptions. Similarly to Baruch Spinoza's famous analysis of the Converso condition in Portugal, scholars like Herculano stressed, while anti-Converso suspicion, segregation, and persecution was often ungrounded, they still perpetuated Jewish identities. Saraiva went a step further, claiming that Converso rejection created an almost ex nihilo Jewish penchant among a majority of already assimilated New Christians. Saraiva's views, and with them many of the past political approaches, were dismissed on grounds of dogmatism, inaccuracies, and reductionism by those Converso scholars who have been bewitched by the appealing quest for Converso inner identities, looking at the inquisitorial sources. However, recent years have seen what I identified, I think, the beginning of a positive de facto reassessment of the importance of the political dimensions of the Converso phenomenon, precisely in order to better understand the complex machinery of Conversos identities displayed in an age characterized by confessional centripetal efforts towards conformity, endorsed by the emerging states and established religions. But what does it mean to promote today a reassessment of the political dimensions of the Converso phenomenon without leaving aside fruitful concerns with inner identities, since it will be impossible to display here an alternative history of the Portuguese New Christian phenomenon seen from this perspective, let me briefly analyze a few of its aspects encapsulated in a single engraving. You see here the Arch of Lisbon Merchant, and this is part of the Israel Foundation project, and I already had the occasion to publish a part of my findings. The Arch of Lisbon Merchant is an impressive engraving from a book written in Spanish and in Portuguese by the king's official cartographer, João Batista de Lavagna, a Portuguese converso promoted by the king as a member of the Order of Christ. This book, aimed to memorialize King Philip III's visit to Lisbon in 1619 as King Philip II of Portugal. The visit of the Habsburg monarch to Lisbon had been, since his father's stay, a long-awaited event. It aroused vivid expectations among Lisbon nobles, churchmen, and commoners, and most particularly among the men of commerce. All of them hoped that the royal visit would restore to the lonely, almost widowed city its deserved role as the epicenter of the once prosperous colonial trade. A magnificent and costly reception was prepared for the occasion, and leading Converso businessmen, such as Heitor Mendes de Bristo, called the Richman or Rico, played a crucial role in financing the event. A number of Lisbon corporations and foreign nations erected arches of triumph to salute the king. These were decorated along classical and mythological lines, including episodes from the Iberian history, and with symbols, statutes, and text denoting the expectations of each group. But the first and most luxurious was the Arch of the Men of Commerce. At the top of the arch stood some armillary globes adopted by King Manuel I as a symbol of Portugal's heroic discoveries and successful overseas enterprise. Each side of the arch depicts a different continent decorated with an effigy of an appropriate Portuguese king and a deserved virtue. The Gate of America welcomed the Habsburg king arriving from the docks. It was associated with prudence and with killing King Philip I of Portugal, that is the second of Spain, known, as you know, I think, El Prudente. The Gate of Asia faced the east. On one of its sides, a female embodiment of religion raised her eyes over a nearby cross, while on the other, a statue of King Manuel I. The Merchants' Arch neatly shared a clear message: the need to revive the neglected state of India, Estado da India. Portugal, with the help of Lisbon businessmen, was thereby called to fulfill a providential role as protector and diffuser of Catholicism in the East. Significantly, Lisbon Men of Commerce was an oligarchical group of mostly Converso merchants and investors in the Indian spice trade. For them, the call to revive the Portuguese Empire in Asia during the king's visits was not only aimed at obtaining additional enrichment, as well, it represented an extraordinary opportunity to earn public esteem as useful subject of the kingdom, worthy to be promoted into the old Christian elites. This was precisely a central claim made 3 years later by Duarte Gómez Solís, an experimented converso trader with Asia and the son-in-law of the above-mentioned powerful Converso merchant, Heitor Mendes de Brito or Rico. Solís discourses on the commerce of the two Indies, as well as other of his economic projects addressed to the king and to the court in a genre called Arbitrios. He pleaded for the promotion of his own group of rich Converso India spice traders into the old Christian aristocracy, rejecting any collective solution such as a general pardon. In doing so, he was arguing against contemporary efforts made by leaders and agents of the Converso Nassau at the court in Madrid to obtain a general pardon after the ascension to the throne of a new regime under King Philip IV and his favorite, the Count Duke of Olivares in 1621. These Portuguese Converso leaders and lobbyists would finally obtain a limited and short-lived relief from the Inquisition in 1627, precisely when the king declared them as the bankers of the crown instead of the Genoese. Many of them were wealthy parvenus, having little to do with the well-to-do Lisbon spice traders. At the same time, Gómez Solís expressed much of the disenchanted political experience of his father-in-law and peers as political representative of the Nassau. From 1591 to the end of the century, Heitor Mendes de Brito and other rich conversos led negotiations with the crown to obtain a general pardon in exchange for a significant amount of money to maintain safe maritime routes to India. In this, they were simply following a well-established Portuguese Converso political tradition among the leading spice traders and merchants, which was at least initiated by the renowned Mendes Nasi clan. By 1601, Converso leaders and lobbyists obtained freedom of movement for the Nassau, and in January 1605, all the Converso detainees were released from the prison of the Inquisition as part of a general pardon. The promised sum of 1,700,000 cruzados began to be raised among members of the nation in Portugal, but also in Spain and the Iberian colonies, being compelled to contribute with a tax or finta. Local agents of the Converso leaders made careful lists of Converso taxpayers, and these rolos de fintas according to the patrilineal criteria of belonging. This, however, turned out to be a durable database of Converso families well after the short-lived pardon of 1605. Already, at the beginning of the 17th century, Heitor Mendes de Brito and other Converso spice traders opted for leaving the collective Converso leadership in order to attain more quickly their own social aspirations. They became lenders to the crown and founders of companies of commerce. In doing so, Heitor Mendes de Brito and his sons were rewarded by the king as fidalgos of the royal house. They also began to intermarry with old Christian families of the lower aristocracy. At this point, we may better understand the socio-political connotation of the Arch of Lisbon merchants. At the same time, Heitor Mendes de Brito case paved two alternative ways to attain Converso promotion. The raising of a type of Converso personal banker or lender of the Portuguese monarch, such as will be Duarte da Silva under the Braganza dynasty, and the emergence of trade companies mostly led by a Conversos consortium, such as the short-lived Indian Trade Company, founded by Heitor Mendes de Brito's firstborn son Francisco, along with other wealthy New Christians. The General Trade Company of Brazil, supported, however, by Brazil old and New Christian merchants together, and the Junta do Comercio, renewed by the Marquês de Pombal, which according to Jorge Pedreira, who is here, was still associated with the Converso merchants, despite the fact that only a handful of them could claim such origins. That said, Eito Mernes de Brito was registered as a taxpayer in the Rol das Fintas of the General Pardon of 1605. And for this reason, as Fernanda Olival has shown, and she's also here with us, his distant descendants had immense difficulties being fully accepted as members of the prestigious military orders. Moreover, those private bankers of the Portuguese kings and investors in the trading companies that so flourished in the 17th century were not immune to inquisitorial prosecution. As such, many powerful conversos did not completely abandon collective lobbying and leadership because they did not always have any other choice. Thus, with the help of the relentless Father Antonio Vieira and other Jesuits in the 17th century, conversos led by Manuel da Gama da Padua obtained from Pope Innocent XI the suspension of the activities of the Holy Office between 1674 to 1681. In such cases, Converso leaders and lobbyists used to argue three leitmotifs. First, that most of them were sincere Catholics. Second, since the Portuguese Inquisition was biased against them, it has to be reformed after the Spanish or the Roman moods. Third, being Christians of Hebrew origin, conversos deserved to be treated with honor for being simultaneously Israel in flesh and in spirit, like Jesus Christ, the Virgin Mary, St. Paul, and the first apostles. However, the anti-converso political stereotypes also persisted. No wonder that the final stanza of a satirical sonnet written by Antonio Lobo de Carvalho on the occasion of Pombal Edict of May 25, 1773, suggested that the abrogation of the distinctions between old and new Christians was still obtained through the traditional converso lobbying and not by enforcing enlightened absolutist policies. I quote, "Let nobody remember their sins anymore, because they totally repented, although they must pay 500,000 cruzados. Ninguém se lembre já dos seus pecados, que eles estão de tão arrependidos, mas é de dar 500,000 cruzados." Here was my call for fruitful dialogue on both the overt and the inner approaches. Yet the first step, I think, is to repoliticize the converso phenomenon, also not in restorative nostalgic terms, but rather by adopting fruitful, innovative, and more broader ways of perceiving politics. My hope is that this workshop will contribute to attain this goal. Thank you.